we sued the organizers of the Charlottesville rally, the white supremacists who came down to Charlottesville and basically wreaked havoc, culminating in a terror attack where James Fields drove his Dodge Challenger through the crowd of 29 counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer and injuring a number of folks, including our clients. And so we took him to trial.
So we're here with Mikey motherfucking Bloch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Second best catcher to come out of Washington, D.C. in the mid to late 90s. You know what I mean? Behind yours truly.
I don't know about second.
Would you say you were a better baseball player than me? Would you say that's right?
I wouldn't say that. Listen,
what would you say? Talk about me as a baseball player and then talk about yourself as a baseball player.
If you could just talk about him as much as
As
possible,
much as
that'd
we
be great.
stay on me.
Is that what
that's
this is
kinda
about?
what
I'm just coming to
just
talk
about
about
him.
John playing baseball?
Yeah. All that fucking legal shit and all the great shit you did. We'll get to that stuff. But let's talk about me.
I think my favorite Jon Bernthal baseball moment was, do you remember when you remember Riyadh?
I do remember Riyadh.
You remember Riyadh was pitching, and John's behind the plate, calls a curveball.
Yeah.
Riyadh throws this, I don't know what you call it. It was like just this floater, and it was almost like in slow motion. And John's sitting there, doesn't move. Just reaches out with his bare hand, catches it like this.
Did I yell at him?
Yeah,
I bet I yelled.
Stands up,
That was so
throws about 100-mile fastball back at him, yells to everybody, "Throw harder, Riyadh!"
It was slim pickings for pitchers, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that sort of encapsulates you as a leader.
But you were you were a fucking good baseball player, man. Did you go on
Thank you.
Did you play in college?
I played a little bit. I played 1 year at Wesleyan.
1 year at Wesleyan. And you played
and
hockey too, right?
For half a year at Wesleyan, and then I got hurt. I got a hernia.
Yeah.
And then
Then you were
basically-
introduced to fun, and you were
Yeah.
like, bye-bye sports, fuck all that.
Yeah. And then the coach was like, "You probably shouldn't play anymore. You weren't that good anyway." So that was about it. But
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, we have, everybody gets mad at me on this show because I never do like proper introductions. I just start, surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, you?
You
just dive right in.
I don't follow protocol that well. But, we grew up together. I love you. I've known you a long fucking time. We've gotten into a lot of trouble together. We've had a lot of good laughs together. You've made quite a fucking life for yourself, man. And
Thank you.
You've done some amazing things. You're a
appreciate
new
that.
dad, which is the best of them all.
True.
Which we were just talking about. But I just want to just to let the audience know kind of who you are and what you've been up to. Just talk a little bit about sort of what you've been getting a lot of attention for. Sort of recently, the major case that you just kind of came off of, let's just hear a little bit about what that was.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, and I appreciate. Great to see you, first of all.
You too, Mikey.
Really appreciate being here.
Mm-hmm.
Great to see Gareth.
Yeah, we got the professor with us.
Yeah.
We got the professor with us.
Yeah.
Whenever I have really smart guests,
Yeah.
we got to bring. It's like it's
Someone
just
who
some
can
shit
actually ask
doesn't change.
questions.
That's it, dude. You got to bring the brain trust out. You know what I'm saying? Tell us, Mikey.
So I recently finished trying the federal litigation in Charlottesville, Virginia. We sued the organizers of the Charlottesville rally, the white supremacists who came down to Charlottesville and basically wreaked havoc on the town, ultimately culminating in a terror attack where James Fields drove his Dodge Challenger through the crowd of 29 or so counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer and injuring a number of folks, including our clients. And so we took him to trial. And we filed suit in October of 2017, so about 2 months after the rally happened. It has been 4 years of litigation.
Wow.
And we just tried the case in Charlottesville, about 5 blocks from where the terror attack took place. And fortunately won a $26 million judgment against the organizers of the rally, who really are kind of the leading white supremacists in this country. So,
and the neo-Nazis and white supremacists that organized that rally, that's Richard Spencer. Who are the? It was directly against him.
Yeah. So we sued. We really tried to focus on the folks that were actually culpable for organizing and perpetrating the violence. So there were hundreds of people that came out to the rally, and we were not suing people that were just there to express their views, however, heinous those views are. So we sued Richard Spencer, Jason Kessler, a guy named Chris Cantwell, Matthew Heimbach, a guy named Michael Hill, Michael Tubbs, a couple others, and then basically the white supremacist organizations that they run, and as well as James Fields, the driver of the car. And the theory of the case was that basically this was a conspiracy to commit racially motivated violence, and not just a First Amendment rally to sort of express, heinous views.
And who were the plaintiffs in the case? Like who hired you guys, and was it pro bono work? How did it all come about?
Yeah, so the plaintiffs were folks that were injured in some aspect of the rally. So the rally was actually 2 nights. It was Friday night, August 11th, where there was a torch march and sort of this iconic photo. You see these photos of 500 neo-Nazis with torches marching through University of Virginia's campus. So that resulted in a fight, basically an assault that on about 20 students and counter-protesters. Some of our plaintiffs were injured in that attack, and then others were injured the next day at the events that took place on Saturday, August 12th, including a number of folks that were injured by the car. The case was originally brought by Roberta Kaplan, whose firm I was at, and she basically, first of all, she's a real just pioneer civil rights leader in this country. She actually won United States versus Windsor, which was the case that gave us gay marriage. And then she started this firm that was focused on, among other things, public interest litigation and using the law to fight people and causes that are harming society and can be redressed through litigation. So and this was sort of the first and kind of biggest case she brought. And so actually what happened was, as soon as Trump did his, very fine people on both sides thing, which upset the country, but a lot of people in the firm in particular, Robbie was on a plane 2 days later to Charlottesville and met people that were injured and basically put together this case.
Mikey, you said before, I mean, obviously we'll go into this, but the difference between people who are going to express their views and then the people who are going there with the express sort of interest and design plan to commit violence. Look, man, obviously you've done countless days and years and months of research on this. You have an intimate knowledge of the events and all that. How do you decipher that, and what percentage of how do you decipher that? What sort of bluster and bravado and bullshit that you hear online versus what are the actual plans to go commit violence?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the short answer is that it was pretty explicit. Most of the rally was planned on this online platform called Discord, which is supposed to be for video gamers to chat while they're playing video games. You probably play a bunch of video games still. But so they had this secret private chat room that was called Charlottesville 2.0, which is what they called the rally, and that's where they planned most of what took place. And I think anybody reading it, reading the actual things that they discussed, wouldn't have any doubt that they were coming to plan violence. So it was it was explicit. They talked about fighting tactics. They talked about whether it's legal to run over counter-protesters in Virginia. Thanks a lot. They talked about how to use tools that sort of can look like First Amendment tools, but to use them as weapons.
Like what?
Like flags, bring flags, but fortify them, with PVC piping so that, for better thumping.
Thanks,
It was really, really vivid and explicit. And I should say that, we also care about the First Amendment, and which is
And as somebody who's talked a lot of shit yourself, probably as myself.
Not me.
How
I
do
mean,
you?
I
No,
learned
but I
it from
mean, like,
watching
how
you.
do you?
Yeah.
Is there any examples? I mean, can you give me an example of something that you like? Where do you draw that line? And I really want to go into like the personal.
Yeah.
You know how personal this was for
Yeah.
you, and where that line is drawn, like in
Yeah.
a legal issue. But how do you draw the line between is this guy just talking shit to know this is in fact this
Yeah.
guy's going there to incite violence?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of things. First of all, the statements themselves were explicit. But second of all, if you look at the statements, and then the actions, and then how it plays out, and then how they react after the fact, sort of looking back, you can see that they talked about doing a specific kind of violence. They planned and they took steps to commit that kind of violence, right? So they talked about flagpoles and, fortifying them with nails and PVC piping, and then they bought, and they brought flagpoles, and then they used flagpoles to beat people up, and then they celebrated the violence that they committed, right. And so, sort of proudly, and so, when you look at the whole progression, there were people that were online that were just sort of talking trash.
Yeah.
And they didn't get sued. But the ones that were like, they talked about it for months, they planned it, they executed it, and then they celebrated it, those guys, in our view, wanted this to happen. And so that's who we sued.
So talk a little bit about, like, when you were actually in this trial. I know that, Richard Spencer, for one, defended himself and kept trying to say, no, that was just kind of the culture of the thing.
Yeah.
We didn't actually mean it. We'd always joke about that stuff and never do anything. And you used a lot of his own words against him. Like,
Yeah.
you played a lot of footage in the case. Like, talk about how you put that together, and a little bit about, like, 4 years of your life going to this, and, like, a lot
Yeah.
changed in the country in that time.
Yeah.
How did you guys feel as you went through that process too?
So one of the things that we were up against is, which sort of goes to what you were asking about, is like this like trash talk environment, and there is a lot of shit talk, and that's not illegal. Part of what we discovered and tried to establish, and I think did establish for the jury, is that is a tactic in white supremacist culture, is to set up this defense of plausible deniability by claiming we were just joking. And so how do we prove that? One thing is we had phenomenal experts who have studied white supremacists and have embedded themselves with white supremacists for decades, who came and testified that this is a tactic that they've been using for decades, literally, is to sort of talk about horrible plans, this sort of tongue-in-cheek way, execute those plans, and say that we were just joking.
It's just like, this is so cowardly. You know what I mean? I was just joking. Yeah, I mean, that's like what a fucking 4-year-old does.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, actually, there's this great line in Spencer's testimony where when he was confronted with a number of the stuff he said, his defense was like, it's just the 7-year-old me, which is sort of the built-in defense. We also had explicit documents where one was called the style guide. It was basically the white supremacist style guide that literally says, when you are talking about, plans or whatever, do it in a joking way so that you essentially have plausible deniability.
Where is that style guide? Where's that written?
Well, so it came out at trial. It was a document that was
It was like circulated amongst these
yeah,
groups and chat rooms.
Yeah, so there's a site called the Daily Stormer, which is, you probably subscribe.
Fucking asshole.
So there's a site called the Daily Stormer where that is like the white supremacist, blog, basically. Yeah. And this was written by the guy who founded the Daily Stormer. That was a style guide for writing on the Daily Stormer. And we also had a woman who was in one of these groups and actually got very high up in the group. She was sort of radicalized, and then she got out. And she testified for us and was like, and she testified about the style guide, and she testified about, like, this is a tactic. This is what they do. And so, we were ready for the defense of this is all
We're
just a
just
joke.
joking.
Yeah. And it's pretty well established, sort of documents and people and experts and.
But in your mind, your heart, from all from like kind of going through all this, the organizers of this event, these guys that put this thing out there, especially the guys that you tried.
Yeah.
Do you feel like they were hopeful that there would be violence? Do you think that they were that it could have kind of gone either way, or was this definitely like, where do you think their minds were in terms of like, was this exactly what they wanted?
Yeah.
Because they even talked about, I feel like I read about, they talked about hitting protesters with cars. Like that was something they talked about, correct?
Yeah. They talked about it in a number of places in the planning sessions leading up to the rally. And so, I think a lot of this is exactly what they wanted.
How does violence sort of achieve their their master plan? Like what is in it for them? I mean, aside from, I get to like beat up somebody who thinks differently than me or looks differently than me, or like what's in it for them to commit this violence?
And do you perceive they have a plan? Like, do these guys have a plan, or is it just sort of like disorganized chaos that they're trying to sell?
Like these aren't the skinheads from like down at the Exorcist steps in D.C. who just were looking for a fight, right? I mean, this is a nationally organized group of people.
Yeah. So there's a lot. I think you guys touched on a lot of different issues there. So. I think historically, so one of the things our experts talked about and testified about at trial is that violence has been a tactic for white supremacists since the 1860s, since the Klan started. They were committing violent acts against black people for the purpose of hurting black people, for the purpose of terrorizing the community.
Voter suppression,
for the purpose of establishing dominance. So that's one. That's one thing, is that violence has been a key part of white supremacist culture for 150 years. So what do these guys want? I think there's some of that. I think there's some that like to fight, and they like to beat up people that, disagree with their views. There's also a lot of talk within white supremacist culture about the race war. And there is this fear that white supremacists stoke, that white people are being replaced, that, sort of politically they're being replaced, and that demographically they're being replaced, that they're going to actually be the minority in 20 years. And that we need to, according to them, sort of hold the line. And so what a lot of white supremacists, including our defendants, talked about is that they want a race war. They want to spark a race war. They want to, and there were folks that went to Charlottesville hoping that this was it, that this was the beginning of the race war. And so what do they get from that? They get attention. I think there's this, I mean, a lot of it is like, real sort of fantasy conspiracy theorist, like crazy shit. But I think there are at least folks that say, we want, this is going to be the start of the race war, and it's going to spark it, and then, we're going to get two sides, and we're going to win, and we're going to establish our dominance.
Is it that crazy? I mean, like, I just like, when you look at, the percentage, I really want to like hear your opinion of like who these people are, what I guess like, what is it like? Is there a fine line between the folks that, would consider themselves to not have a racist bone in their body, but they feel like the election was was stolen,
right?
And these folks that even you get behind closed doors with white men in even progressive circles, and they'll start saying how they can't get work and how the scale's not tipped anymore because of different kinds of, it was affirmative action 10, 15 years ago, but now there's all this. I mean, like, I just feel like that line is getting more and more narrow. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, is the goal here to try to get those folks over to this side? I mean, that's like, I think obviously we know I'm no like history buff, but I feel like that's exactly kind of like what the Nazis did in Germany. It's like, find a scapegoat, blame the ills of society on a group, and then like increase in numbers and then go to fucking town. I mean, is that part of the race war master plan?
I think for some of them, yeah. I mean, and a lot of this came out at trial that these guys love Adolf Hitler. I mean, and one of our defendants was the National Socialist Movement, who style their group on the Nazi Party. One of the, a lot of the.
How big is that? How big is that here in this country?
It's not clear. I mean, they don't have rosters, so it's hard to say.
In your opinion, I mean, what do you think? What's your guess? Like
a couple hundred in that group.
But then, so the actual membership in these groups is pretty small, right? Mm-hmm. But when you think about the people who kind of are the wink, wink, nod, nod group, right? Like the ones who aren't actually, they're not members of the organization, but they look at that stuff and kind of tacitly they're okay with it. Like, how big is that, you think, when you look at our country?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a great and
unanswerable
important
question.
And unanswerable question. I guess I'd say a couple things. First of all, one of the things that I think we tried to do at trial is to make clear that these defendants are not your sort of like run-of-the-mill conservatives, and these are not, and these are not Trump supporters, right? These are guys that, in fact, a lot of them hate Trump, in part because they think Trump's not racist enough for them. So these are not people that I feel like, or I think many people would feel like, we just have sort of a political difference. Like, these are guys that actually hate black people and really hate Jews and want violence. And so that, and I think that group, I think, is not huge, although they're vocal and they can be destructive. But it's certainly a spectrum, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't going after anyone who's gray.
Yeah.
I mean,
so you cross-examined Richard Spencer for hours, and you spent 4 years of your life working on this thing. You're in a courtroom standing up there with him. You must have had a lot of emotions you had to pack away. I mean, your family is Jewish. You're talking to this guy who organized a rally where people are literally out there chanting, Jews will not replace us. Like, how did you handle that in the moment and like compose yourself in a way that got to the right outcome?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So and it was 4 years of that. I mean, so I deposed a lot of these guys, including Spencer and Chris Cantwell, and some of them made it explicit in depositions. It was called an asshole at trial. Right.
Well, they were right about that one.
Yeah. These guys aren't crazy.
No, but look, under what circumstances were you called that?
So in a deposition, while I am questioning one of the defendants for 7 hours, and I think I asked, I was challenging these guys, right? Which is my job, and they don't love being challenged generally. I mean, nobody does, and they really don't love being challenged by a New York Jew.
Yeah.
And it's 7 hours, and people get tired and stressed, and there were some explosions, and that's when a lot of the core beliefs came out.
Straight up, yeah.
And you're right. Like, I am Jewish. My grandparents were escaped from Nazi Germany. My grandmother got to this country on the night of Kristallnacht. My grandfather went back to Germany as one of the Ritchie boys to fight for the Americans. And that has always been a really inspiring thing for me, a sort of great act of real patriotism and courage. So yeah, there's a lot of, and just, anti-Semitism and racism is terrible and despicable, and to be confronted with it, particularly for 3.5, 4 years, is emotional. So, I think for me, I sort of was able to, I guess, compartmentalize. I mean, because at the same, the case is not about me, and in this kind of, I don't know if this is sort of the irony of litigation, but the things that were horrific and heinous and vivid and insulting were also great evidence. And so, if I'm if I have my lawyer hat on, which is sort of the hat I had to have on, a lot of times I would sort of listen to these like terrible things, and and a large part of me was like, well, that's going to be great for us.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, it must feel good for you, though. I mean, it feels good for me, like sitting here with you, that as a lawyer, you still exist in a world where like there is a decision on facts and facts matter. And it feels like the world we live in now, like we live in a very blurry world where people are entitled to their own facts, where the natural blurring of lines, the ability to distance yourself from things that you've said, the gaslighting that happens, like that all is like, that's a societal phenomenon that's just fucking terrible for everybody. And it must feel nice to like walk into a court of law and actually still operate in a world where you actually can't do that. There is a final decision made on what fact is and what truth is. And you walk out the door with an answer to a question like that.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, and it was a huge fear of mine that we would go in and get a jury that saw this as politics, and that was going to base a verdict on their politics. And so, and we tried to control for that as best we could. So Karen Dunn, who's also was another lead lawyer, who's just a spectacular trial attorney, and she gave part of the opening statement, and part of it was, from the get-go, this is not about politics. We're not here to debate the First Amendment. We're here to show you evidence of racially motivated violence. And then secondly, we try. It was a big part of jury selection and the Western District of Virginia, which is the federal district where this was tried, is very mixed. I mean, there's Charlottesville, which is sort of leans progressive, but it goes out to the border of Kentucky, which leans the other way. And we really wanted open-minded jurors. I felt like if we had open-minded jurors, we were going to win. And if we ended up with jurors who just were not going to listen to facts, then we were in trouble. But yeah, and so that was one of, I think, a big fear of mine, and something that I think is comforting in some sense. The question in my mind was always, are we going to have jurors that listen to facts? And
I think it's reaffirming you did, right? Because I mean, I think about it, and it's like we really culturally live in a moment where, number one, like permissibility has been granted, like you said, to things that weren't before. Like whether however you think about Donald Trump saying there were really good people on both sides, like that is giving permission from the highest level to that kind of behavior.
For sure.
It's like, well, the second you equate both sides of what happened in Charlottesville, you're saying there's a rationale for both of those sides existing.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the second piece of it is the plausible deniability of what people say, and then afterwards saying, no, you're just misinterpreting what I said. Right? And I think all of that seemed to come together in this one case for you, where it's like you've given cultural permission for people to behave in a certain way, and how does that impact a juror's mindset? And then the other thing is this notion of plausible deniability, which allows everybody to walk away from words that came out of their own mouths. And you guys managed to actually fight through that and come to a good outcome, which is in some ways is kind of amazing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There's something very comforting about the fact that basically what you said before, that we presented the facts, and a jury of our clients' peers, that was a mixed group politically from the community and racially, said, this is not okay, and that's great, and that's very comforting. I totally agree with that.
And talk just, I'm just wondering, so in just the course of your life, right? I mean, you went to college, right? And then you went to law school. Like, when did you when did you pull it all together, man? Like, when did you
when did you stop making Craig calls?
Yeah, I mean, just.
Well, that I haven't.
I mean, you were just. You were just a complete fucking maniac. Like, when did you pull it all together?
Yeah, I actually think sports helped me a lot. It's sort of like, practice. The practice turned into studying and reading, and so if you look at my my college transcript, there's a very, very clear line between my first 3 semesters, and then my last 5 semesters.
You turned it on.
Yeah.
And then you went to law school.
Yeah.
Right. Where'd you go to law school?
I went to Harvard.
You went to Harvard?
Yeah.
You fucking.
Do you know that I ran into this guy?
This fucking guy went to Harvard.
He went to Harvard. I know. And I don't know if you remember this. I was in Cambridge because I actually worked at Harvard before I went there at the public interest office. I think it was the summer of 2000. I'm in this field. Yeah. I believe it was called Cambridge Common. Mm. I really remember it vividly. I was playing soccer. Mm. I hear this this really, really offensive.
I'm sure you were super offended. Dude.
I was really offended.
Yeah.
And I turn, and it's you. And you come over to me, and I was like, "What the fuck are you doing
How would
here?"
you be here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you pulled out your Harvard ART student card, and you said, "I go to Harvard, motherfucker." And I imagine my shock. You know, it was like what everything I knew.
You could forge anything these days, you know. Like,
would you get that electro back?
Yeah, and his actual photo was on it.
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah.
How the fuck did that happen?
How does that work?
Yeah.
How does that work?
And you told me about how you'd gotten there, and I'll never forget that what you said is that you were going to go give a speaking tour to tell all the kids in America that this is how you get to Harvard. Huh. And I was really talk about being afraid for our country. That I was like, we're in big trouble. So, but here we are. Yeah,
so you're there, and then you get out, and I imagine, there was and then you're a public defender, correct?
Yeah. Well, so I clerked for a couple years. I clerked for first a judge in New Orleans who was a former criminal defense attorney who was awesome, and then I clerked for a judge in Chicago who was great, and then I went to a firm for 3 years in D.C. And then I went to the public defender's office.
So what made you want to, frankly, leave a white shoe firm, making a bunch of money, and go work as a public defender?
Yeah, you had every option. From what I've heard is that you've had every option in the world open to you. You could have made all the fucking money in the world, and then you decided to go be a public defender.
In the garbage.
Yeah.
So I was at this firm, and I was and it was phenomenal. I loved the firm. I loved the people. Great experience. I just was not representing people. I was representing huge corporations. And I just, it wasn't it didn't inspire me. And I wanted to be in court. I wanted to represent people. I wanted to represent people that were in real trouble. And so I left. I was at the firm for 3 years, and then I went to the Bronx Defenders, and it was, I would say the best job of my life. So I started in 2011 in the Bronx, and definitely the war on drugs is still having a huge impact.
Sure.
But at that time, in 2011, it was also kind of the height of stop and frisk in New York.
Right.
And that was devastating to communities like the Bronx.
How so?
And so, because you have just hundreds and thousands of generally young people of color that are, stopped and frisked and arrested, sort of without basis. And so it, my first 3 or 4 years at the Bronx, you would see it just constantly. So we would, you pick up cases in arraignments. You could go, that's when the judge decides whether or not to set bail. And so you go and you meet your client, and they're locked up. And I just can't tell you how many times I met somebody, usually a young person of color, and I would say, they would be charged. A lot of them, there were a lot of weed charges, which is kind of crazy to think about at this point, but a lot of just possession of weed charges. And you'd go in, and you'd read the complaint, and the complaint would say, this person was walking down the street and carrying an amount of weed in their left hand, which is nuts because no one does that. Certainly not in the Bronx. And so you'd meet this person and you'd say, what happened? And they would say, the cops jumped out at me. I heard the cops jumped out at me hundreds of times. They'd say I was walking down the street. Some of them would say I had weed in my pocket, which was actually not a criminal offense. It was not legal, but it was not a misdemeanor to have it, in like not open to the public. Mm-hmm. And so I had tons of clients that would be like, I was walking down the street or I was hanging out with my friends or whatever. Cops jumped out at me, threw me up against the wall, searched me, searched my pockets, threw the weed on the ground, charged me with possession of weed. And then they'd write it up that, that it was open in public view because that's what makes it a misdemeanor. And so your question was sort of, how is that devastating? I mean, you just see this like entire community of folks that are just like living basically in a police state, right, and harassed, for doing something that, folks are, the same number of people are doing, on the Upper West Side, that are not getting just hounded and harassed by cops.
And if they do if they do it and get caught for it, they have the means, and they'll never see inside. And then these guys who can't make bail are then stuck in jail for ages, and then are forced to commit other crimes or go through all sorts of heinous shit that's going on in jail.
Yeah, or plead guilty to get out of jail.
When you look at like that cycle, especially what happens, I imagine a lot of the guys that a lot of the folks that you defended would end up in city jails, would end up in Rikers, and like, can you just? I know there's been a lot of stuff that's been going on, talking about what's going on in Rikers and the horrors of that. What do you see about the effect that has on people? Can you just talk about kind of what's been going on at Rikers and your experience with it?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I also really just appreciate that you are doing this. That you are shedding light on these issues. I think it's awesome, and I think it's a great way for you. I mean, it's great that you're using your platform to do this.
Nice,
it's really helpful, I think.
Fucking A, dude. You know what I'm saying?
That's the last nice thing I'm ever going to say to you.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with your
There's
muscles.
also that.
Yeah,
it's
really
kind of irrelevant, but whatever.
And if you think about just the general effect I've had on you in your life, I mean, he got to it a little bit in the beginning, but sort of at looking up to me as a team. I was the captain.
Yeah.
I was the captain of the baseball team. Just how I conduct myself in life, with curiosity, with courage.
Yeah.
With just overall, just kind of, just like I have a beautiful life aspect.
Yeah.
I'm going to excuse myself, so you guys just enjoy the rest of it.
Yeah.
But anyways.
No, I'm honestly, I'm happy that I don't have to call you captain anymore. I think that's, I do.
You do. But anyway, go ahead.
Sorry. Anyway, captain. So in terms of what's going on right now,
just explain before you do that. Explain to the motherfuckers who don't know the difference between you get arrested, you get charged with a crime, you're not convicted of a crime, and if you can't pay bail, you go to fucking jail. This isn't prison. This isn't people who've been found guilty by a jury of their peers. These are people who the police have said, we caught you doing this, and they could totally, whether they're innocent or guilty at this point, we don't know.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
And then what happens?
That's exactly right. So you get arrested. You are just accused. You see a judge. A judge then decides whether or not to set bail, which is an amount of money that you have to pay in order to get out of jail. And and for folks that need a public defender, they're generally speaking not going to have that money to pay bail. Right. Obviously depends on the case and the amount of bail, but just thousands and thousands of people are in jail right now because bail has been set. They have not been convicted of anything, and they can't afford to pay.
And sometimes for a long period of time.
Really long. Yeah.
Like what? Like what's the longest you've heard of somebody who's just been in jail awaiting bail?
I mean, I had a trial in the Bronx that took 3.5 years to get to trial, where he was acquitted.
That's fucking nuts.
And he was in.
He was acquitted.
The whole time. And he was acquitted.
What was he accused of?
Attempted murder.
He was in Rikers the whole time?
He was in Rikers,
Yeah.
So that's not at all unheard of. I mean, sort of that in and of itself is a huge, I think, injustice, that you are going to jail because you can't afford to pay bail.
What can happen in a place like Rikers in terms of committing other crimes, being exposed to the danger to your body? What can happen there?
Yeah.
What has happened?
Yeah, so it's an incredibly dangerous place. It's physically dangerous. It's medically dangerous. It's obviously psychologically dangerous. And so it's a very, very violent place.
It's a national embarrassment.
It's a national embarrassment.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly right. 15 or 16 people, I think, died this year from suicide. That happens a decent amount. I mean, way more than it ever should. I mean, one is sort of too many. People die from physical violence. People die from medical neglect. And it's just a really dangerous, violent place. And so if you think about, you get sent there, you can't pay bail, you are in hell. And then, what I think compounds the problem is a lot of people at that point get offered a plea, right? And so you can't pay bail, you're not getting out. It can take literally years for you to get a trial. And so somebody gets a plea offer that's like, you plead guilty right now to a misdemeanor or a felony and you get probation. And your choice at that point is, do you want to plead guilty, totally irrespective of whether you did it or what the strength of your case? But if you plead guilty right now, you go home. And if you don't, you wait probably 2 years in jail in this, hellhole for your trial, which you might lose. And then you sort of layer on top of that, I don't want to get too far afield, but you layer on top of that the so-called trial penalty, which is you go to trial and you lose, you're looking at a significant sentence that gets sort of amplified by virtue of the fact that a judge is sort of upset with you for having put everybody through this.
So as a public defender, oftentimes are you telling people to plea?
So that's a great and really hard question. So number one, in 7 years as a public defender, I don't think I ever had a single person turn down a plea that gets them out of jail. Not one.
So your bottom line is like, let's keep you out of jail.
Well, my bottom line is to advise you, the client, to make the best decision for you. And so there were plenty of times I wanted to say, I feel like, so my job is to say, here's what you're charged with. Here's what I think the strength of the case is. Here's what the offer is. Here's when I think you may go to trial. And I think we have a good shot. I have an appreciation for young people being young people. And I think I have an appreciation I think I have a sort of knee-jerk antipathy towards bullies, which I think you do too. And it has made me gravitate towards wanting to fight for people who sort of at root are good people, but they did something dumb that might be very human, that I might know plenty of people who have also done, but who may find themselves having their lives completely destroyed for it.
Yeah.
And so I'm just I think drawn to, and I guess in some sense feel like a sense of responsibility to people that I feel like are bullied by the system or, haven't been given a fair shake, but are facing really severe consequences, far more severe than they should.
How do you get people to care about criminal justice reform in the way that public sentiment has turned towards police reform?
Yeah.
Because you can argue that the actual criminal justice reform impacts a much broader swath of people at the end of the day, but it sort of sits in the background in this country as a thing that people don't talk about or think about. How do you get people to think about that in the same way?
Yeah. It to some degree, people think about it more when you have we have social media and cell phone videos, and people see a lot more injustice, I think, and it gets talked about more. But you're right, it doesn't seem to rise to the level of real fundamental systemic change. Yeah. And how do you do that? I'm not sure.
Change the world, buddy.
Yeah, I'll try. I'll try. But this is helpful. I mean, to have you guys have this conversation with people and use your platform to like have these discussions is great. And I think we need more of this.
I got one more too before
Yeah.
we end this. Just explain a little bit about your pops, dude, and growing up with growing up in a house with a magician for a dad. Like that was the coolest fucking thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, your dad's a beast ass magician.
Yeah.
And just explain that. Like, what's that like, dude?
Yeah. Well, I have the coolest dad in the world. I'm sorry, guys.
You do.
I know you guys think, other people do, but I did. So my dad is both a lawyer and a magician. He's an arbitrator in terms of his legal profession, and he's also...
I can see the billboard now, by the way.
Right?
Makes your troubles disappear.
Right.
Yeah.
My dad had a company called Collector's Workshop, and he would build magic for other magicians. And it got pretty big time. So he was building magic for David Copperfield, and yeah, I mean he's the best.
That's so cool.
My mom's the best too, by the way.
She is, yeah.
So I was blessed. Still am.
That's awesome, man. Great to see you, man.
Yeah, Mikey.
You too, dude.
We really
God,
appreciate you doing this, man.
You guys
we love you,
are
bro.
just
It's fucking
love
great
you
to
guys.
see you, man.
Yeah,
fucking-
we should do this every week.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. If you dug what you saw and you want to hear more, subscribe, like, do all that stuff. It'd mean a lot to us. I hope you dig these episodes as much as we dig doing them. You guys take care of yourself.